Hi everyone, Jeff Wilson here with Go Security Pro, and today I'm going to talk to you about how I hacked an electric company. And here at Go Security Pro, we're in the business of data breach prevention. So we use data breach analytics, studying how companies like yours are getting hacked, and help you identify a plan within your resource constraints and abilities that effectively helps you prevent breaches. And so we were hired by an electric company to do a pen test, an external network penetration test. So this is no phishing, which is a very common breach threat vector, in fact, and no social engineering. This is purely, looking at the internet exposed systems, applications, services. Can you compromise those? And so, in fact, we were able to compromise an internet-facing service that then allowed us to gain access to the internal network that we were then able to use to access over 300,000 of their customer records. We got full control of their outage management system and a great deal of control over their internal network. We were looking at a bunch of servers exposed to the internet, but there were really two key ones here that came to play. One is a web server, which was their outage management server. And this server, just has like a login page. Well, I'm not going to sit there and probably guess, I try some default credentials and all that. None of those worked, right? We always check for default credentials on all web servers. So what I found was on this web server, there was a subdirectory that wasn't linked to by any web page, that wasn't, cached in Google. For all intents and purposes, it wasn't visible, right? But if you know the web subdirectory, you could get there. And it had a verbose set of logs. I mean, this is like the most verbose logging I've ever seen in an application, where it's logging parameters to function calls. And there were over 8 gigabytes of raw log data that I was able to download. And because it's capturing all of these, function parameters, it's logging things like username and password to the authentication function. And so within those log files, able to parse those out and figure out, okay, there's about, 50 credentials in here, one of which is the application administrator credential. And so you maybe ask yourself, well, how do you know that web directory was there? Well, so we use a variety of tools and a variety of techniques to identify, parts of your exposed internet that you might not realize are there, that, maybe were set up one time to help with debugging or default content. But we look for all of these web directories and all of these hidden places that a lot of pen testers won't look at, right? And so we found this very rich treasure trove of web logs, right? And so we have the application administrator password. So then we're able to log into the application as the administrator. And this is an outage management system. So with administrator access, you can do things like create outages. You can track vehicle locations, truck locations. It had the ability to push out a message, any message. I could just type up whatever message I wanted and hit send, and it would go to all of these mobile devices as a push notification. And obviously I didn't do that because this was a pen test, and we minimize the impact on services, on customers. And so that was clearly, nothing we were going to do, but we had the capability to do it, and an attacker could do that. So then, how are we able to then get to the internal network? Okay, so great, you're on a web server, you've got application administrative access. It's not good because even this outage management system has a lot of customer data in it. You can drill down to meters and all sorts of things, right? This application had an advanced report writer, which is essentially a glorified SQL statement preparation tool. And through using this report writer, was able to read the raw contents of the database. So things like the application configuration file. There's actually a configuration table, rather, where settings for the application are stored. One of those settings was, how does this application send out notifications via email? And so the application was configured with an Outlook user account, and that account was a clear text username and password in the configuration file. This Outlook user had the ability to log into a remote desktop server. Now, this is a service account, has no need to be able to remotely log in. All this email account needs to be able to do is send email, generate emails outbound, right? But in fact, it was a domain user, and it had domain access. So it wasn't least privilege, and I was able to then log into the remote desktop server, which then put me on the terminal server inside the network. Well, I'm actually in the DMZ, but that server is able to reach into the network. So now I'm able to see, oh my gosh, there's file servers, there's workstations, there's SharePoint, there's all sorts of other stuff. I found over 50 items of that contain sensitive information. One of those was an old Access database that had over 300,000 customer records, detailed customer records, and it was on an open file share. Organizations often struggle with securing data internally and identifying what data is on open file shares versus what is secured. And a database like this should have been in a highly secured area, because not everybody in the company needs access to that, right? Going from no access externally to application administrator of a web server, to being able to log into remote desktop, to being able to access customer records internally. This is a great case study, and it highlights a lot of challenges that organizations struggle with. So here's some lessons learned from this specific case. And so know what data and services you're exposing. Had this electric company known that this web application had a subdirectory that had very verbose logging usernames and passwords and things like that, that was clearly not a good thing to have happen. So a lot of organizations have pockets of information out there that they're not aware of. I mean, even if you do external scanning periodically, keep your inventory accurate of, hey, here's what's external facing, internet facing. It takes it's due diligence to have a pen test provider look at that and say, okay, is there anything sensitive being exposed? Secondly, two-factor authentication for remote access, right? This application, just with a username and password, I was able to gain application administrator access, right? And then I was able to log in to that remote desktop server without two-factor, right? So these are two remote access points that are single-factor authentication. We need to move to dual-factor. It's almost, it's almost due diligence at this point. Even if you aren't required to from a compliance perspective, make sure you have two-factor authentication set up for remote access. So things like applications that you can log into from the internet, cloud-hosted applications, Office 365, your VPN server, your remote desktop gateway. Service account least privilege. So this Outlook account that was configured in the web application was not least privilege. It was configured to have domain user access, which it's not a domain user, it's a service account. So next, identify unsecured sensitive data on your internal networks. You should have a process in place whereby if you have sensitive data, making sure it's where it's supposed to be and not on open shares that are out there where any domain user can access. And then finally, ensure you're getting a quality penetration test. In this case, with the energy company, they had pen tests for years prior to this. And I found this web directory that no other pen tester had found because we use a thorough, comprehensive approach. So make sure you're getting a quality penetration test. Not all penetration test providers are created equal. Look at bios, look at experience, look at what you're getting. I hope this has helped you think about some things in your environment. I would love to talk to you if you have any questions about any of this. You can direct message me. And really good. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon.